opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it.
Hello, this is Dane Wigington with the weekly edition of Global Alert News Hour from GeoEngineering Watch Radio. The show is broadcast on KQMS throughout Northern California, Saturday morning, 6 to 7 a.m. Those who want a recording of the show can find it under the radio section of GeoEngineeringWatch.org, also on the KQMS website. It's a commercial-free news hour because there's far too much to cover and far too important issues to distract with commercial interruptions. So this show is paid for out of pocket. For new listeners, who is GeoEngineeringWatch.org, the sole purpose of our website is to try to sound the alarm on what we face as a species, starting with the climate engineering insanity that's occurring in our skies, that's being perpetrated by governments around the globe who think that they have the right to commit the human race and all life on Earth to a grand and lethal experiment, which is climate engineering, which is nothing short of weather warfare, nothing short of biological warfare, because the materials they use are highly toxic, all of which we are breathing. So the sole purpose of GeoEngineeringWatch.org is to try to bring this issue to light and to a halt. Too much to cover today as always. The siege of planet Earth continues from countless directions. The walls are crumbling, and still, most are oblivious, but not for long. Wait and see. A quote to consider from Frederick Douglass. Quote, "Where justice is denied, where poverty is enforced, where ignorance prevails, and where any one class is made to feel that society is an organized conspiracy to oppress, rob, and degrade them, neither persons nor property will be safe." Something to consider with the society that we see imploding around us. Now, on that note, the French massacre, very convenient for the power structure. Very, very convenient. Again, yet again, taking people's eyes off of everything else that's happening on the planet. Now, I'm not stating the details of the French massacre, how it happened, why it happened, because I can't know, and I've seen no credible data that one could build a conclusion off of. But certainly these events are bound to happen when you have the type of power structure that was in some sense just described from the quote from Frederick Douglass that I just read. These events are going to happen more and more, and they play right into the hands of those in power. And interestingly enough, almost every time we see that the perpetrators of such events were known to the authorities for very extended times. And yet, again and again, these events happen. And they are, one cannot argue, very convenient for those in power. And when we have the epitome of such events, the 9/11 event, which we now have some documentation coming out about that may shed even more light on that. If these 28 pages that have been released, we'll see how much we may yet learn about what we were not told about that massive event, which clearly did not happen the way the official narrative states it happened. For any who choose to do any research on that, I challenge you to search 9/11 Architects and Engineers for Truth and find out what 2,500 architects and engineers, top experts from around the globe, have to say about that event and how completely impossible the official story is. Now, moving on, a short Vaxxed update. Vaxxed from cover-up to catastrophe, the groundbreaking, incredibly important documentary that's been extended, that was extended for 2 additional weeks at the Anderson Valley 11 theaters, making a total of a 3-week run for this viewing in Northern California. I want everybody to mark their calendars for the major and completely free vaccination facts awareness event and global climate engineering update at the Cascade Theater on August 5th. This is an all-day event with 2 separate screenings of the groundbreaking must-see Vax documentary film, 1 p.m. and 6:45 p.m. 2 updated PowerPoint presentations to address the ongoing global climate engineering assault. Dr. Andrew Wakefield will be at this event for question and answer sessions. The producers of the show will also be present. Del Bigtree and Polly Tommy and Dr. Sherry Tenpenny will kick the day's events off with a shocking presentation on vaccination dangers and the coming mandatory vaccinations for adults if we stay on this track. A full expose on pharmaceutical industry funded bonuses for doctors that do the most injecting will be presented. Color glossy informational flyers for this event can be found at Orchard Nutrition in Reading and Reading Radio. Those flyers should be there perhaps by the end of the day today if the shipment comes in as expected, but they'll be there by the first of the week certainly. Grab flyers, pass them out to others, bring your friends, family, and show them what they don't know about the dangers of vaccinations. Hard facts, hard data. And by the way, if you think our local media is not concerned about this event and not already attempting to marginalize the critical data on vaccine dangers that will be presented at this documentary film, Vaxxed, think again. Northern California's primary newspaper, the Record Searchlight, is already doing what they do best, pumping out the official narrative that is dictated to them by the corporate media industrial complex, a core part of the global power structure. Much more on this later in the broadcast, including some damning quotes previously sent to me in messages from Record Searchlight editor Silas Lyons, again later in the show. First, a quick rundown on the rapidly shattering delusion that is industrialized, militarized society. And consider this. The paradigm we've known, the road the human race has chosen to take, at least so far, was not only completely and totally unsustainable, rather, it's much more than that. The path the human race has so far chosen is nothing short of a trajectory of certain global omnicide. If the current course is not immediately and completely altered, global extinction of most or all life is our short-term horizon. That's a mathematical certainty on this trajectory. We're all living out the global example of Easter Island. I've made this point before, but the parallels are so striking. Here it is again, for those that are not familiar with what happened on Easter Island. A thriving population with a lush, resource-rich island exterminated themselves for all practical purposes until they had to resort to cannibalism because they built idols. The large statues, for those that have not seen Easter Island, I'm sure everybody has at some point, but the large, some 50 and 60 foot high statues that face out toward the ocean, and they filled their island with these statues, these idols. They cut down every single tree on the island, which was their food source, a very exceptional palm tree, until they had to live in caves and resort to cannibalism. Easter Island is the metaphor for modern civilization. We would do well to think about that, remember that. A few current headlines on that note before we get to elaboration on some of the stories I've just mentioned on vaccinations and climate engineering. Central banks directly buying stocks to boost market. For the U.S. population especially, they seem to think that nothing can be wrong in the world as long as the stock market is up, and those in power know that. So they're literally buying stocks with central banks, printed fiat money, to artificially prop up the stock market. This has been going on forever, but the card house can't be maintained much longer. And it's time the population wake up to the fact that as the biosphere implosion again accelerates, no matter what the stock market number is, it won't matter. Another headline, Europe's economic crisis has spread from periphery to core. The dominoes are falling on many, many fronts. These are just a few headlines to try to connect some of the dots to give a better picture to those that are not watching the horizon. Another headline, the Dow and the S&P 500 soar to brand new all-time record highs. How is this possible? Now, the how is this possible part is part of the headline. It's not possible in any reasonable scenario. It's not possible. It's completely artificial, and it is functioning as the power structure has planned so far. It pacifies the population who think so long as their stock portfolio is okay, so long as their retirement account is okay, nothing else matters. And that couldn't be further from the truth, by the way. Couldn't be further from the truth. More headlines. Stocks will crash and crush California's pension funds and taxpayers, report states. It's coming. No matter how long they've been able to delay it, and I grant they have delayed it a very, very long time, primarily because the American population does not want to wake up and look at reality. So those in power are able to continue the facade. But their ability to do so is waning rapidly by the day as conflict and chaos breaks out around the globe, and that conflict and chaos is directly related to biosphere environmental implosion. Another headline: demand for U.S. arms exports set to keep growing, official says. This is what the military-industrial complex does while it's literally eating its own tail. It's like a snake eating its own tail. That's what's keeping the economy afloat right now. And that can't continue, obviously. That metaphor should make it clear that such a scenario can't continue. The only thing keeping the U.S. industrial military complex afloat is producing arms, pumping up the military, as other countries are now starting to do as well. Back to the not only unsustainable course the human race is on that I just mentioned earlier, but a course that will absolutely mathematically lead to certain near-term total extinction if it continues. Another headline: fool's errand. NATO pledges 4 more years of war in Afghanistan. What will it take to wake up the population, and most specifically our brothers and sisters in the military, who are choosing to believe the lies they're being told, who are choosing to believe that all the invasion of countries, the occupation, is all about freedom and democracy? That couldn't be further from the truth. So as one who has supported our military brothers and sisters by supporting DAV, VFW, helping to rehab NAM vets, I'm asking you, please wake up. Please wake up and look at the facts. Refuse to cooperate for the tyrannical use that the power structure is putting you to. Please don't participate. Another headline: South Korea chooses site of THAAD U.S. missile system amid protests. The U.S. and NATO powers are pushing the planet and its populations toward World War III, setting up missile bases along China's boundary, setting up missile bases, missile installations on Russia's boundary. As I've said so many times, what would we do if China or Russia were setting up missile bases along the U.S. border? What would we do? Ask yourself. Break away from the corporate media lies. And by the way, for those who don't watch any TV of any type, and I hear that from lots of people, although that may sound admirable, I would question that practice, because how can you know what's going on? How can you know which lies are being fed by which corporate media source? And if you don't study that, at least sometimes, and look at the hard frontline facts from more credible independent sources, how can you connect the dots properly? So to completely disconnect from all sources of media completely blinds people to the horizon, so people don't realize or understand what our government is doing right now, pushing us toward global conflict. So please take some time to look out of the rabbit hole. Another headline: Iraq War, an unaccountable crime. Excerpt from that report. Britain's Chilcot report recalled the Iraq War lies that justified an aggressive war that claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. But this international crime has largely been sloughed off with almost no accountability. Back to what I just mentioned a few moments ago. What our militaries are being used for. It's not about freedom and democracy. It's about resources and control, period. It's about time the population wake up to that, and it's far past time our military brothers and sisters wake up to that. A few more headlines. Leaked data reveals how the U.S. trains vast numbers of foreign soldiers and police with little oversight. The School of the Americas, very patriotic sounding name, was a school, a facility in the U.S. that trained the paramilitary people who terrorized Central America, slaughtering countless innocent civilians. This is a fact, historical fact, that of course our population doesn't know, because of course our media won't tell you this story. Look it up. About anything I say today or any other day. I don't want anybody to believe anything I say, but I'm asking you to investigate. Look up School of the Americas and research what our country did. This is elaboration of the headline I just read. Another headline: War is coming, and the global financial situation is a lot worse than you may think. That's exactly a fact, and war is the last card the power structure can play when it runs out of options, and that's exactly where we're heading. Another headline: NATO reaffirms its bogus Russia narrative, the Russian scapegoat. How much do we switch scapegoats during the course of recent years? First it's Iran, Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi, now Russia. When will the American population wake up? And I'm not saying that Putin is not a criminal in many ways. I'm not saying that Saddam Hussein wasn't a criminal. Who armed Saddam Hussein, by the way? Why don't we remember that? And I'm not saying any government is not criminal. But what I'm saying is, when you have that criminality directly proportionate to the size of the military, which is inarguable, who would be at the top of that heap then? The United States of America. And that's a simple fact right now. We have a military-industrial complex that's completely out of control. And other powers around the globe are trying to avert global conflict, but it's being pushed from right here at home. Wake up and look at the facts. Another headline: China vows to protect South China Sea sovereignty. Same thing. Our warships are right off their coasts. What would we do if China or Russia had their warships cruising the Channel Islands? What would we do? Off the coast of California, by the way, or along the East Coast. What would we do? How much hypocrisy will the American population stand for? Our military is completely out of control. The Western militaries are as well, and a global arms race is now underway because of that. Another headline: Venezuelan army deployed to control food production and distribution. That's how bad it is in Venezuela. I've read headlines about that on previous shows. People in Caracas looking for pets or animals for food. That's how bad it is. American population has no clue, because they are distracted by the corporate media mainstream mechanism of mass distraction every single day, and they don't want to wake up. Much of the American population believes if they simply ignore the problem long enough, or all the problems, they'll just go away. Not going to happen. And about ignoring problems, quote, another headline here: Superbacteria detected in Rio's waters as Olympic Games near. Here we have South American countries that are descending into chaos, struggling to keep their populations even fed, and they're going to host the Winter Games. More distraction for global populations. Let's all just go to the Colosseum Games in Rome. Nero fiddles while Rome burns. That's exactly what we have happening here. A population, not just ours, but others around the globe, that don't want to wake up, that simply want to be entertained. Olympic Games, or holding the Olympic Games in the future in Tokyo, Japan, next to a nuclear volcano with no end in sight. How can this happen? How can we have quote-unquote experts and authorities that are so incredibly blind that they would allow this kind of venue to take place with that kind of contamination in Rio or Tokyo? And it's because, as I've said in so many previous shows, institutions that the public trusts to inform them of dangers are there to hide those dangers from them, not to disclose or expose them. The population needs to wake up to that fact. One more headline: Gorillas are being killed and eaten by miners in the Congo. How tragic is that? They're killing and eating gorillas because they're that desperate. And what are those miners mining? Something for the military-industrial complex, something for modern civilization. How can people place such value on gold, precious metals, or diamonds when people are dying to produce those materials just to adorn ourselves with in many cases? Anybody who hasn't seen the movie Blood Diamond should watch that. It's based on realistic events, what's really happening there. And so many people, especially in America, don't want to know what it took to get them their material wealth. They don't want to know. That needs to change, or we're on the course for hitting the wall very soon. The circus of mass distraction again in theaters surrounding the U.S. presidential race continues. Let's cover that base. All is orchestrated and spun. There's no question about that. And as expected, Bernie Sanders continues to fulfill his part in the play, as does Trump. And given all that we know about Clinton, truly, how could anyone even consider such a criminal who is also completely incompetent? And Bernie Sanders, of course, abandoning everything he claimed he stood for and joining and promoting Clinton Doesn't that make it clear that this is all a giant act? All of them? They're all sold out. They're all simply actors in the play. And about Trump, I want to state this again. If he was a real threat to the military-industrial criminal complex, he would already be dead. And as if the U.S. military was not already completely out of control, as I've stated over and over through this show, Trump wants to put more fuel on that fire by further funding the military-industrial juggernaut of insanity. And to continue on that note about the military and the threat they pose to all life on Earth, it's not just our military, by the way, but global military-industrial complex as a whole, from all the major powers. For over 70 years, these powers have been completely disrupting Earth's life support systems by attempting to manipulate the climate system itself. And the level of climate engineering and weather modification assault has now grown to a point that's truly impossible to fully comprehend. And not only is the entire web of life being exposed to highly toxic metal and chemical aerosol dispersions into the atmosphere and thus our breathable air column, we're also being bombarded with massive microwave radio frequency transmissions. And these are used to manipulate the electrically conductive aerosols, the jet stream, and our weather as a whole. All of the just mentioned factors are so completely destroying the ozone layer, which is why the sun feels so incredibly intense to any that are even slightly awake and aware. So here's the bottom line. Not only do we face the repercussions from the endless list of damage done to the planet by industrialized, militarized civilization, we face the greatest human hubris of all, the decimation from the decades-long climate modification, again, which is weather warfare. Nothing less. Also biological warfare because of the toxic materials being used. The climate modification programs must be exposed and must be stopped. So, how is the weather on planet Earth? Not good, and it's going to get worse very, very quickly. This is a headline, by the way, a massive heat wave is poised to envelop the U.S. from coast to coast next week. Excerpt from that headline. Following on the heels of the hottest June in history of the lower 48 states, an extended, intense, widespread heat wave is likely to develop next week. The heat wave will start in the plains, states, and parts of the Intermountain West, eventually spreading to the West Coast, South, and Midwest by Thursday, July 21st. The heat wave is also likely to sweep northward into southern Alberta and Ontario. Cities like Dallas, Denver, Oklahoma City, Kansas City, Chicago, Minneapolis, Fargo, and eventually New York City and Washington, D.C. may experience sizzling heat and stifling humidity by the end of the week. This is no joke. For those who have bought into the lie of global cooling or the global warming is a hoax, you are repeating exactly the narrative that those in power and the geoengineers, the climate engineers, want you to repeat. They want you to believe there's nothing wrong with the climate while they continue to decimate the climate at the same time. Why would they want you to think otherwise? Think about it. It's not about Al Gore. It's not about the carbon credit sham. I've said that so many times. It rings in my ears, but I have to keep saying it because so many people can't get past that. They just can't get past that because Al Gore, by the way, played exactly the part the power structure wanted him to play also, to make people hate him so much, to make people hate his hypocrisy so much that they would take the opposite position of anything Gore said and completely disconnect their sense of reason. And that's what a lot of people have done. And the bottom line is this. Everything Al Gore said was wrong, but in the opposite direction of what people are choosing to believe. Our climate situation is exponentially worse than anything Gore said. And in fact, the latest frontline data as of yesterday, Friday, indicates that, mathematically speaking, we may now be on a trajectory for as much as a 15-degree temperature rise in the next decade. Now, we are already likely past the threshold at which humans have existed on the planet, because although we hear the climate summits, the IPCC, the climate scientists stating that they're trying to hold us below a temperature rise of 2 degrees C, because we know they're falsifying data to the downside, not the upside. Everywhere we check, we're seeing an underreporting of high temperatures, a very significant underreporting, 3, 4, 5 degrees. What does that mean? It means that we are already likely past 3.5 C of temperature rise, which means we're past the point at which humans have previously existed on the planet. Doesn't mean everything dies all at once, but look around you. Look at the trees. How fast are they dying? And for those that don't recognize a tree that's not healthy, if you see a person 200 or 300 feet away on the street, you can't tell if they're healthy or not. But when you walk close and take a good look at them, then you can tell. So for so many people, they look at a hillside full of what are still standing trees and think everything's fine. But if you know anything about trees, our trees are suffering horrifically. There's dead trees all over Northern California, all over the world, in fact. We just have recent reports that at least 66 million trees have just died in California, and that report is very conservative. How long does anyone think we're going to be here when the trees are all dead? How long? And the temperatures are absolutely soaring, and the nighttime lows don't go down like they should. Why? Because the atmosphere is filling with greenhouse gases, CO2, but also methane. Methane is very important. Methane is the linchpin that will determine our collective futures. Massive methane reservoirs are releasing all over the globe. The atmosphere is filling with methane, and methane, which our climate science community almost never tells us, over a 10-year time horizon, is from 100 to 120 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. So back to the geoengineers and their attempt to hide the problem by making it worse. And they're not just trying to hide the problem. This is weather warfare, by the way, period. This is about power and control, period. There's nothing benevolent in climate engineering. And think about our whole climate science community. And I'll lead this into vaccinations in the medical industrial community in a moment. But think about our whole climate science community talking about geoengineering, not having the courage to admit it's going on because their paychecks and pensions depend on them not admitting it, and never mentioning, when they talk about climate engineering as a proposal, filling the atmosphere with light scattering particulates as a proposal, never mentioning, oh, by the way, all that settles down to the surface of the earth where we all inhale it, toxic metals and chemicals. What's that doing to our neurological systems? Because it's been going on for 70 years. So on that note, on the same toxic materials, I want to lead into back to vaccinations, back to the upcoming event in Northern California, and back to the fact that our local media, the Record Searchlight, is already going into damage control because they know the viewing of Vaxxed in Anderson is already making waves, extended for 2 weeks. So what does the Record Searchlight do? Exactly what they're told to do. Put out some propaganda to try to pacify the population and put them back to sleep so they don't investigate, so they don't actually investigate the facts on the vaccination. So here's the article from the Reading Searchlight. Headline: Law goes into effect requiring kids to be vaccinated before going back to school. From this recent article from the Searchlight. California's Senate Bill 277 went into effect July 1st. Most people know that. This will no longer allow for personal belief exemptions. And by the way, are we talking about personal beliefs if we have hard facts, confessions from CDC top scientists stating the dangers? I'll get to that in a moment. Continuing from the report, again, that allow for personal belief exemptions to withhold vaccinations based on personal or religious beliefs. The law that all children entering public and private schools be up to date with their vaccination exemptions will still be available for children who show a medical need. Now, a medical need determined by who? And there is almost no margin for allowing this left because those in power want to be sure that every child is poisoned with these vaccinations. That, again, it's not about the potential that vaccinations might have under the right circumstances. It's about what's being put into those vaccinations that's most dangerous and indisputably dangerous. We're talking about heavy metal contamination that peer-reviewed science study proves causes neurological damage. But yet, in spite of that, what does the Searchlight article state? Continuing from their report, and I'm quoting now from Dave Marin, Program Manager with the Community Health Protection Division of the Shasta County Public Health Department, whose job, by the way, depends on him saying what I'm about to read, and I'm quoting. Dave Marin said this: vaccination is by far the best prevention against disease. Maybe that's true, Dave, as long as we're not talking about autism or other types of neurological disease. Dave Marin continues, it's the best tool in our toolbox. Exactly what Dave Marin is paid to say, exactly what his paycheck and pension depends on him saying. Continuing from the Searchlight article, and I'll get to some hard facts to back up what I'm saying as far as hard data on vaccination dangers right from the Centers for Disease Control. Give me a moment on that. From 2006 to 2003, continuing from the Searchlight report, or from 2006 to 2013, Shasta County saw a gradual growth in exemptions from around 3% to 8% and surpassed the California average in 2013. Now, that shows that some people in Shasta County are thinking. They're using their sense of reason, and I hope that continues. Continuing with a quote from Dave Marin, he said, that was the first time we saw a reversal of the trend. In other words, people were not vaccinating. Dave Marin continued by stating that these numbers, the increase in the population that's choosing not to vaccinate, were reflective not just of Shasta County's, quote, beliefs, but of those of surrounding counties. And this is what people like Marin and the media complex are trained to do. They're trained to avoid facts. They're trained to marginalize anyone who questions the status quo narrative, so that these are just our, quote, beliefs. They don't mention the facts that we're building those conclusions on. They simply try to marginalize the issue. So, very conveniently, reading from this report, in April 2014, after 17 years of no cases, Shasta County had its first confirmed case of the measles. Not long after, the Public Health Department launched a campaign to increase vaccination rates among the population. Also pushed education to curb misinformation that was out there, Marin said. This is Dave Marin. And what misinformation is Dave Marin talking about? What he's talking about is any information, no matter how credible, even coming directly from a top scientist at the Centers for Disease Control, even that information is considered misinformation to Marin because that information challenges the official narrative that vaccinations are safe, which could not be further from the truth. So therefore, the power structure and anybody who serves the power structure is tasked with trying to marginalize any information, no matter how credible, that challenges the official narrative. This is what's happening around us. This is what it's up to the population to use their sense of reason, to wake up and look at the data. And I would ask again, what caring parent? Show me a caring parent that is not willing to look at hard data, a confession from a scientist from the Centers for Disease Control stating hard facts on the record, which I'll get to in a moment. What caring parent would not look at that data because he so wants to be a part of the herd, so wants to not question the official narrative that he would willingly remain ignorant and thus jeopardize their children's health? That's not a caring parent. Not in my book. Now, continuing with Dave Marin and his campaign to vaccinate children in Shasta County. The campaign, Friends Don't Give Friends the Measles, and by the way, doctors should not try to give their patients autism and should not accept payment from the pharmaceutical industrial complex without educating themselves on exactly what they're injecting into our children's arms. So when we have a program titled Friends Don't Give Friends the Measles, how many children are getting autism? It's staggering, absolutely staggering. I'll get to those hard numbers in a moment as well. But we see that by following the official narrative, Mr. Marin and his department got an award for $10,000 from the Health Officers Association of California. That's what happens with the obedient minions of the power structure. They are rewarded. It's the case throughout the entire power structure, and those who are part of the cancer understand this. So they abandon their morality, they abandon any sense of responsibility, not just to our children, but to the whole. They abandon any willingness to investigate and tell the truth. They simply want to be rewarded for their obediency. That's the bottom line. Marin stated this: we're not where we need to be. He said the misinformation, listen closely, this is from Dave Marin again, Shasta County public health official. Marin said the misinformation spread by Andrew Wakefield, an anti-vaccine doctor who linked vaccines to autism, and then the Searchlight article goes on to try to marginalize Dr. Wakefield by trying to connect him with information put out by celebrities such as Jim Carrey and Jenny McCarthy. Now, first, to correct the record, Andrew Wakefield has never said he was anti-vaccine. Never. So Marin's statement is a lie, period. Wakefield is simply concerned about hard statistical data due to the additives in vaccination. And again, for the record, this is statistical data from the Centers for Disease Control. Why would people like Marin not mention that? Because they are trained. Those who serve the pharmaceutical industrial complex and mainstream media, who also serve the same, are trained to attack the messenger, to distract from the real issue by attacking the messenger, and that's exactly what the Record Searchlight article and Dave Marin and Amber Sandhu, who has written this article, that's exactly what they have done. So there you have it. The Record Searchlight already doing damage control, already trying to counter the fact that Shasta County citizens, North State citizens, are starting to look at the data, starting to wake up, and they're shocked, by the way. I don't know anyone who's walked out from seeing the Vaxxed film and is not completely overturned in regard to their perception of reality once they have seen the facts. Now, on that point, the facts, and not just a completely propagandistic article that omits the facts, exactly what I just read from the Searchlight. I want to read a letter that I just sent to Silas Lyons, the editor from the Searchlight, who chooses to put out this kind of mainstream, baseless narrative and not the real facts. It chooses to be irresponsible to the readers who feel they're being told the truth from the Searchlight. Here's my letter to Mr. Lyons. Hello, Mr. Lyons. It would seem that the Record Searchlight continues to hold its propensity to either spin the facts or altogether omit them. In the just pinned and printed vaccine pushing article linked below, which is a copy of the article I just read, that was authored by Amber Sandhu, the omission of undisputed facts is as blatant as the official narrative of power structure paid propaganda. Ms. Sandhu's disinformation article implies that it is just, quote, personal beliefs that compel parents to be alarmed and cautious about vaccine dangers. Why did she not mention the on-the-record quotes below, which I'll cite in a moment, from top-level CDC, Centers for Disease Control, scientist Dr. William Thompson? This top scientist has confessed on the record that the CDC has been hiding statistically proven vaccination dangers for decades. I'm about to quote. This is from Dr. William Thompson, top scientist at the Centers for Disease Control. Here's what he said. My name is William Thompson. I'm a scientist from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, where I have worked since 1998. I regret that my co-authors and I omitted statistically significant information, which is on vaccine safety, by the way, in our 2004 article published in the journal Pediatrics. Another quote from Dr. Thompson, quote, "It's all there. This is the lowest point of my career, that I went along with that paper. I have great shame now when I meet families of kids with autism because I have been a part of the problem." Again, that statement from a top Centers for Disease Control scientist. A final quote from Dr. Thompson. He stated this: senior Centers for Disease Control people just do completely unethical, vile things, and no one holds them accountable. Continuing with my letter to Record Searchlight editor Silas Lyons. So again, Mr. Lyons, I would ask why your, quote, journalist Amber Sandhu and you completely omitted such important on-the-record information. Instead, in a very cowardly fashion, Amber Sandhu repeated the baseless official personal attacks against an individual, Dr. Andrew Wakefield, which were parroted by the vaccine-pushing program manager Dave Marin, who it seems, as I already mentioned, received a big bonus for his department by strictly adhering to the official false and factless narrative of lies and omissions regarding vaccine safety. Below is a quote from you, Mr. Lyons. This was your response to the Shasta County citizens that were alarmed and perplexed at your total blackout of a major community event that was staged in Reading on August 14, 2015. An event with over 1,000 concerned citizens in attendance, an event with speakers that included former government scientists, former military personnel, and the CEO for the world's largest environmental and engineering consulting firm. Yes, Silas Lyons from the Record Searchlight last year, August 14th event, completely blacked out any coverage whatsoever of this major community event at the David Marr Auditorium, 1,000 plus people in attendance, all the experts I just mentioned. No coverage whatsoever, and here's why. This is a direct quote from Silas Lyons, starting now. Silas Lyons said this: "We continue to believe it's our journalistic responsibility not to lend coverage, and by extension credence, to thoroughly debunked conspiracy theories." Continuing from Silas Lyons, our position on this is consistent. As I told another correspondent, I recognize that by declining to participate in coverage, we are fueling claims that there's a vast conspiracy, that we are co-conspirators with our military public servants and the entire body of mainstream science. I can't help that, as that is the very nature of conspiracy theories and what makes them so self-perpetuating. Mr. Lyons, when we have a confession from a top CDC scientist on the record and almost 10,000 pages of statistical data that scientist is trying to prevent before Congress, is that a theory? Is that a theory, Mr. Lyons? And for those listening, every parent, every caring human being that thinks we should try to protect our children instead of helping the medical industrial complex harm them, it's up to us to look at the data. How can we possibly make an intelligent decision if we don't at least look at the data? If we blindly accept the official narrative at face value by those who are paid to put out that narrative? How irresponsible is that? I challenge everyone, however skeptical you are, if you have not looked at the data, how can you possibly have a reasonable, fact-based opinion? It's not possible. Finishing with my letter to Silas Lyons, the public is rapidly waking up to the crimes that have been perpetrated against them by their own government and the agencies it controls. The public is also rapidly waking up to the fact that media sources they have trusted to keep them informed of critical issues have instead completely betrayed them. When the Searchlight and KRCR in Northern California and countless other media agencies simply pump out the official narrative on all major issues with no investigation, in fact, not only no investigation, but willful denial of and omission of hard, credible facts, like the quotes I just read from a top CDC scientist. How can such agencies be considered anything less than totally tyrannical? That's exactly what they are. And my final statement to Silas Lyons in my letter to him that went out to many other community members as well, so that everyone could see this dialogue between myself and Silas Lyons. My final statement: according to the law, those who willingly and knowingly help to hide a crime themselves then become an accessory to the crime. Once the public is fully awake, the record of your behavior, Mr. Lyons, as a newspaper editor will be seen in the full light of day. Final statement to Mr. Lyons. So the question is this, Mr. Lyons: will you also do your best to black out any coverage of the major public awareness event now scheduled in Reading for August 5th, 2016? We'll find out soon enough, won't we? If the Record Searchlight and KRCR again try to hide critical data from the population. And by the way, on that note, I initially tried to secure the David Marr Auditorium again for the showing of Vaxxed. David Marr Auditorium in Reading seats over 1,000, and it's controlled by the Reading or Shasta School District. And I was initially told the auditorium was available, and when we tried to secure it and they found out what it was for, they immediately said it wasn't available. When I called back with one of our GeoEngineeringWatch.org attorneys on the phone and recorded that call and told the school district official that I was recording the call, they immediately changed directions and admitted that the auditorium was in fact available. We tried to secure that date because they knew the phone call was recorded. We gave a check to the school district, and they refused to confirm the date for almost 3 weeks with us, apparently trying to make sure we did not get that auditorium. They did everything they could to make sure we did not get that auditorium, and that's why we're at the Cascade Theater. Because it was clear the Shasta County School District wanted to be sure that parents did not see the Vaxxed film. How tyrannical is that? And for any individual working within that school district, how do you look yourself in the mirror if you're participating in preventing parents from seeing data that they have a responsibility to look at? Very, very credible data, right from top scientists at the Centers for Disease Control. It's despicable. It's absolutely despicable. So many people participating in the cover-up of something that is harming our children, period. Now, a couple of headlines that we don't see on mainstream media about vaccine safety also. These are recent headlines from last week. Quote, angry parents in Colombia shut down schools, lock gates in protest over HPV vaccine injuries. It's not just here, it's all over the globe. When will Americans wake up to what's happening and start looking for real news in real places that aren't just mainstream media weapon of mass distraction propaganda? Now, from this report, July 12th, today when hundreds of children of Carmen de Bolvar were to resume classes after day holiday mid-year, they found their schools closed by several groups of parents of girls who are being affected after being vaccinated by the vaccine against human papilloma virus, HPV. In the Bolivarianos municipality, with banners and padlocks, parents blocked the educational institutions to demand that the government respond on more than 1,000 cases of HPV vaccine injuries. What will it take? Continuing from this report, quote, the girls are in crisis, but neither the provincial government nor the national government will give us a solution. Our daughters are still treated like they're crazy, said a mother who spoke with an organization in the region and would not give her name. This is how governments everywhere are treating their citizens, and ours is the epitome of the same. Another headline, Colombian Constitutional Court orders official investigation into HPV vaccine injury epidemic. Epidemic. Same thing here. It's an epidemic. When we have autism increasing in the U.S. 10,000% in 4 decades, how can we not call that an epidemic? And we have people like Dave Marin trying to force vaccinations on all our children because of one case of measles. Would you rather have measles or autism? And we don't know that the vaccinations would have prevented that case of measles anyway. Extremely convenient case of measles, by the way, I might add. Now, another headline. Recent headline, toddler injected with 37 vaccinations before the age of 2 left paralyzed and wheelchair-bound for life. That's a headline from last week. 37 vaccinations before the age of 2. And here's the bottom line on vaccinations and the pharmaceutical, medical, industrial complex. Our children's health and mental state is being sold to the highest bidder, period. The CDC recommends that children get 49 doses of vaccines, of 14 vaccines, before they reach the age of 6. And the total reaches 69 doses by the age of 18. Think about that. Almost 70 doses of vaccinations, all of which contain harmful additives, heavy metals, preservatives, mercury, aluminum. Now, what could go wrong? Right? What could go wrong? Almost 70 doses of vaccinations. In the case of the 2-year-old, 37 doses before the age of 2. How can we possibly think nothing could go wrong? What rational person would think that almost 70 doses of materials that contain the toxins I just mentioned could not do harm? That's not rational. It's not reasonable. And how can the population be so incredibly blind? Our children are constantly being injected with highly toxic materials and heavy metal vaccine additives known to be associated with neurological damage. And as I just stated earlier, the autism rate has statistically increased over 10,000% in the last 4 decades. That's from a conservative estimate of 1 in 5,000 with autism in 1975. Just so you know, these figures are not just grabbed out of a hat. I know exactly what the figures are. Conservative estimate of 1 in 5,000 in 1975 to 1 in 47 in 2014. Now it's felt the rate is 1 in 35 or 1 in 25. Now that would make the 10,000% increase a 20,000% increase. Just so you know how fast the statistics are going up. And to remind everyone, we have MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, telling us that on the current trajectory, based on the math, based on the statistics, that in less than a decade, every other child will have autism. That's the end of civilization, period. Does anyone think a civilization could survive when every other child has autism? And would we think that the child that isn't diagnosed is really healthy, that that child is at its full potential after receiving 70 vaccinations with toxic materials in them? Again, it's not about the potential of a vaccination to do good under certain circumstances. It's about what's put into those vaccinations. Why would they put mercury and aluminum in a vaccination? Now, for those who are trying to hide from the truth, for those who are trying to hide from the data that a film like Vax is trying to present, and by the way, with Dr. Thompson, who has pleaded with Congress for almost a year to present the mountain of documents he has acquired from the CDC, trying to present them to Congress, and Congress will not even give him a microphone. What does that say about our government and our society as a whole? And when will the population wake up and hold our government accountable? Hold the physicians accountable who refuse also to look at this data. Why? Because their paychecks and pensions are heavily augmented by the pharmaceutical complex. In fact, $400 at the Reading event, this data will be presented with the charts and graphs from the pharmaceutical industry. As much as $400 per child for every patient they have for full vaccinations being issued. And we're talking about, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars to a physician who injects all of his patients with all the pharmaceutical industrial complex regime of toxins. How can such a conflict of interest not be disclosed? That our physicians are being heavily compensated by making sure that our children are injected with everything the pharmaceutical industrial complex wants them to be injected with. It's up to us to hold them accountable. And if we take an even wider look at the horizon, we collectively face illegal covert climate engineering programs are saturating our skies with many of the same toxic heavy metals that are contained in vaccines, starting with aluminum. Our military brothers and sisters are participating in this insanity because they're being told, just like the doctors are being told, that what they're doing is for the greater good. And this, again, this is the same as the physicians are being told regarding the vaccination insanity. When will the majority choose to put their sense of reason to use? When? What will it take? How much carnage and decimation has to happen before our society wakes up and takes some responsibility for what's being done to our children, to ourselves, to the web of life as a whole, by those who print the money, by those who control the media, by those who control public perception. And in the meantime, while all this is going on, we have the power structure pushing us all toward World War III, as I stated earlier, and that's a fact. Everyone is needed at this most critical time to join the battle for the greater good. Everyone is needed to help sound the alarm. This begins with real, individual, objective investigation into the frontline facts. How many will continue to remain in denial and thus to remain a part of the problem? How many will choose to commit themselves to being a part of the solution? What will you choose? Investigate the facts. Stand up. Make your voice heard for the greater good while there's yet time to make a difference. While there's yet time to salvage our children's health. And while there's yet time to salvage what is left of our planet's life support systems, now is when we collectively decide what we're made of and why we're here. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineeringWatch.org.
to Anti-Media Radio with your host, Nick